I decided I wanted to be a scientist when I was 17. So I was going to school in England, and I'd actually decided I wanted to be a CIA agent, a spy. And so I was taking my A levels and doing various things so that I could get into a good university. And I was training in kickboxing so I could get a black belt, because of course that's the most important thing if you're going to be a spy. And then I did a summer research program at the National Institute for Medical Research in London, just as work experience. And I did a research project on how chickens develop. So I wasn't interested in chickens as a organism. It's that we can't study how humans develop. We can't do experiments on humans. So you use these things called model organisms, these different animals like mice, fruit flies, yeast, bacteria, chickens, where you can do experiments and then you kind of extrapolate to humans, or at least you learn these general principles that are often conserved throughout the animal kingdom. And so I was doing these experiments on fertilized eggs. So you crack open a fertilized egg, and unlike the kind of egg that you eat, there's a tiny embryo in there. And so I do small manipulations on these embryos and watch their tiny little hearts beating. And yeah, it blew my mind, and I knew I wanted to be a scientist. So then I went to the University of Cambridge and did a bachelor's degree in genetics. I stayed for a 1-year research master's. And then I moved to Boston and did my PhD in biochemistry at Harvard. And while I was doing my PhD, I worked on this type of molecule called RNA. So inside every single cell of our body, we have DNA, which is the sort of genetic code. But DNA gets made into this intermediate molecule at some point called RNA, and it's incredibly unstable. And so as a scientist, you work with these tiny volumes of this really unstable molecule. And if you contaminate it with anything, basically, your whole sample is destroyed, and you could waste. If you're bad at this process, if you're bad at just general like sterile practices, you could waste months or years of your PhD, basically.
Wow.
Not good, because it's already about 6 or 7 years long. So I think I got very good at the kind of principles of sterility, if you could call it that, amongst other things. And it's just something that you apply to all kind of molecular techniques. So I did my PhD for about 7 years. And then a year ago, I moved to New York, where I'm doing the next stage in a scientist's career that's called the postdoc. This will last about 5 years, and then I'll apply for faculty positions. So I run my own lab. It'll be called the Montague Lab, and it'll be in some institute or university. That's the dream.
Tessa, yeah, we have to say, I think we have to applaud and say that you are so inspiring and so special, and it's so awesome to have you as a friend and to see your career. We were at Tessas, what do you call it? Defense, yeah, at Harvard.
Defense.
Yeah, and guys, I have to tell you, I never thought that you can cry at someone's defense, but this is what we did with Ali. We were just sobbing because it was so special and it was so inspiring. Okay, so right now in your career, what is happening?
Right now, I mean, I guess I've now moved into neuroscience, and I'm doing something totally unrelated to the research I've done before. I'm studying this animal called a cuttlefish that I think many people don't know what they are. They're closely related to octopuses. And what's incredible about them is they can instantaneously camouflage to their environment. So they have these skin cells that are controlled by the brain. And so in milliseconds, they can change from black to white, all different patterns. They can become suddenly textured or completely smooth. And it's really, I think it's one of the most incredible things in the world in biology. So I'm trying to understand how their brain is able to do that. And even though it's very unrelated to humans, you can learn a lot of basic principles about how the world works by studying other animals and other processes. So I think we'll learn about just how brains work and it could have implications for artificial intelligence, because this is a very distantly related animal that can do incredible things with its brain. So maybe one day we could build artificial neural networks based on how a cuttlefish brain works.
How has your life changed?
Yeah, it's changed pretty quickly and dramatically, like I think a lot of people. So our institute, which is called the Zuckerman Institute at Columbia University, it's a neuroscience institute, and it's shut down. Now the complication with science institutes that have shut down, I mean, science institutes and universities around the country have all been shut down, as well as around the world. Now the complication with a lot of them, like ours, is that we have many research animals. So in my case, to begin this project that I started from scratch, we built a cuttlefish facility, and we have about 200 cuttlefish in the basement of this building. And it's incredibly important, of course, that we keep these animals alive and well fed. So unlike some places that are 100% shut down, except for a few security guards, we still need animal technicians to look after the animals. And I'm basically the backup, so that if somebody can't come in and feed the animals, I'll be in and doing that. And that's kind of hours of work, of manual, like changing buckets of water and feeding the animals and cleaning things. But the big complication with cuttlefish is they have to eat live shrimp. And so unfortunately, it's a very expensive and very, not a very environmental process. We're working on it. But right now we get live shrimp FedEx from Florida to feed our cuttlefish. So we're terrified that we're going to run out of shrimp for the cuttlefish. So we've been like stockpiling shrimp. We have like every possible tank that doesn't have cuttlefish it full of shrimp. But I've also bought these big waders that come up to my waist, and I have this big fishing net. And worst case, if we can't get shrimp from Florida, I'm going to be like wading around in the rivers of New York City, catching shrimp.
Tessa, count on us, I guess, right? We can put together a New York team that will be disinfected to your standards. Tell us about it. Yeah, and sprayed and everything. Yeah, and then you can go and fish for shrimp together.
Yeah, so, at nice social distance. That might be helpful.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Count on us. Like, this is all about this global neighborhood project that we are creating. This is all about being together and supporting each other. So I think this can actually make a wonderful case for us.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say that on the scale of scientists in my institute, I'm sort of, well, I consider myself one of the lucky ones, because I still have opportunities to go to work and kind of stay busy helping the animals. Whereas a lot of people are just at home all day, every day, which for some people, obviously many people work from home normally, and I guess we can learn a lot from them right now. For me, I like to be busy and on my feet. So I'm pretty intimidated by staying home every day, but it's all about just what's necessary. I think everybody should stay home as much as they can whenever they can. And I would just go to lab if it's a case of keeping the animals alive.
I wonder if this is a good time to ask a question about how your sterile practices in the lab are informing how you get back and forth to the lab, how you're maintaining social distance and sterility when you arrive in the lab versus when you leave the lab, when you arrive home, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So I guess the most important thing with these sterile practices is to have this principle and try and stick with the principle and always be consistent about it. And the principle is that as soon as you touch a surface, I guess in public or wherever you're going, that potentially could be contaminated, as soon as that has been touched, then in theory it's on your hand or on any surface, and it's there until you wash it off, which seems kind of obvious, but I think it's easy to forget it Whereas I realized myself, like, because I'm so used to this kind of practice, like if I go out in public and I touch something, I literally, like, it's almost like I hold my hand like this. Like, I just know this is like the dirty hand, and I won't touch anything with it for like hours unless I'd wash it first, you know. Whereas I think most people, for obvious reasons, just forget at some point. So you need to use this principle of like remembering what has touched what, and then that is no longer a clean surface until it's been cleaned. So for me, practically, I consider my winter coat and my shoes contaminated. So that the last thing for me to put on before I leave the house and make sure I have everything I need, I put them on, I close the door. I guess I move out of my apartment, but as soon as I touch a door handle, this hand is now dirty. So I designate it my dirty hand, I guess. So for instance, if I get out my phone, I would use my phone in my other hand, unless I've decided, okay, I'm going to have dirty hands. Luckily, I only have a 10-minute walk to work. So maybe I'll say, okay, it's fine. Everything's going to now become dirty. So long as I don't touch my face, I'm okay. So I'm like, okay, I have a dirty hand. I've now touched my phone. My phone is dirty. I go into lab, I use my ID card. That's now dirty. Now when I go to touch like a elevator button, I try and do it with the elbow, or maybe I do it with my knuckle so that it's a different surface from presumably like finger pads. And then as soon as I get to lab, like into the lab, I'll wash my hands. And then I will take off my coat and take out my phone and put them on the surface. Now I have clean hands, but my phone and everything else is still dirty. And now I get my spray bottle of 70% ethanol. I know not everyone can get ethanol now, so there are different alternatives. We could talk about that. But some kind of disinfectant, put on a paper towel, clean all the surfaces of the phone, of maybe the keys, the ID card, maybe a wallet, anything that you touched while you had the dirty hands. Now I wash my hands one more time, and now I'm like, okay, I'm fine. And so I go about my business until I touch another elevator button or something, and then I wash my hands again.
So when you get in, you're doing a hand wash, then you're disinfecting the dirty things, and then you do another hand wash.
Yeah, I mean, you could disinfect the dirty things so long as you aren't touching, like if you're touching with a paper towel and then you put them down and then you wash your hands. It's just, so long as you remember which surface is dirty, you wouldn't want to clean them, you haven't washed your hands, and then you touch them again, obviously.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just about consistency.
I saw a TED Talk of Bill Gates, dated like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And this TED Talk, where basically Bill Gates says like, I'm not afraid of, as of now, like nuclear war or like other things that a lot of people are really worried about. He's like, one thing that really scares me is the world, like this possibility of a pandemic. Bill was like, guys, governments, everyone, we need to take measures. We need to take it really seriously. If this happened once already, this will happen again, and we need to know what to do in this case. So right now we see that A, he was right, and B, probably maybe this is not the last case. Yeah, that is. Even this case, we don't know what will happen and where it's going. Yeah, so I feel like maybe this becomes our new reality, what Tessa is describing. Yeah.
I mean, I think, yeah, I agree. It's pretty terrifying, and it kind of was a matter of time until this happened. I think the kind of silver lining, it's not really a silver lining, but something I try and see slightly more optimistically is certain countries in Asia, like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, they've been really good at dealing with this. They've taken much more proactive measures. So for instance, you know, whether they're measuring people's temperature as they come off a plane, enforcing self-quarantine after they arrive. My friend works in Singapore. He's a manager, and he has to take the temperature of all of his employees like 3 times a day. And it's kind of crazy, but now they have so many fewer cases than we do here. And so I think, and the reason why they're dealing with it so well is because they suffered from SARS a few years ago and basically learned the lesson the hard way back then. And we haven't had to deal with anything on this scale before. And we also have a highly irresponsible president. So, at least speaking from the US. So we are dealing with, a much bigger implications than these other countries. So anyway, the kind of positive that I'm thinking is that we're going to have a really hard time of it now, but it's going to force everybody to see the world the way that I guess Bill Gates did, which is that we are not prepared, and now we know what it takes to be prepared the next time this happens. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, we're kind of lucky that it's not really badly affecting everybody. Like if children were dying, this would be absolutely terrifying. And it's still awful that a lot of people are dying, but it could be a lot worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Ali Stoner, a famous actor, is asking if we can't get ethanol right now, what should we use?
If you can't. So somebody asked me this actually on Facebook, and then I found a source of it. So ethanol is another word for alcohol. Some people call it rubbing alcohol. Some people call it, there are different names. I found one source on like a pet website because people hadn't thought to look there yet. And then when I checked again, it sold out. But basically, just on the subject of alcohol itself, it's worth noting that 70% alcohol is much more effective than 100% alcohol. You want just enough water there that helps basically the membranes of bacteria and viruses to explode. So if you can find any source of alcohol that's higher than 70%, then you can dilute it down to 70%. So I've also found there are some like drinking alcohol, spirits, like something called grain alcohol. I hadn't heard of it before, but that's like 95% alcohol. So if you bought that, even if it's supposedly for drinking, if you dilute that 70% just with water, then that would also work. If you can't get that, then I would look for if there are any other kind of disinfectants. If it has bleach in it, then that works. But of course, you want to be careful what you're spraying bleach on. And then the other possibility is just soap, because soap is the most effective thing. It's just a question of whether it's realistic to put soap on things. But in most cases, it's fine. Like you have a pair of set of keys that you walked in the house. Why not wash your keys in the tap with soap and water? My phone, I have like the iPhone, it's waterproof. So actually half the time I give it a little bubble bath, wash it and then dry it. It's fine. Obviously you want to do that only if your phone is waterproof. But yeah, so luckily we're not going to run out of soap. But in terms of alcohol, I think you could get a little creative about where you find it. You could even see if you can buy it from some scientific websites. Some it's called ethyl alcohol. There are different names for it.
Yeah, wonderful. Is there anything else, Tessa, that you think we all should know before we open the questions from our audience? And Chrissy, also, if you have any questions.
Well, I guess just in terms of going back to how to like decontaminate. So I told you what I do when I'm going to work. One of the things you have to think about is how long do you have until you're going to be able to wash your hands, for instance. So when I'm going to work, I know it's 10 minutes until I can wash my hands. So it's okay maybe to touch my phone because I'm about to clean it. If my boyfriend Fred and I are about to go on a walk, let's say, the new COVID-19 walk is like a 2-hour walk. You don't want to touch the door handle and then have a contaminated phone and then, contaminated hand and then touch your phone, because without doubt, you're going to touch your face. So when we're leaving the apartment, knowing that we may not wash our hands for 2 hours, I have some spare gloves from lab, but you don't need a glove. You could just get a paper towel, like anything that you could basically, every surface you touch, the door handles on the way out, you use a paper towel or a glove or a piece of packaging. I don't know, I was recycling the other day, so I used the piece of cardboard to open all the door handles and then I recycled and left. Anything so that you don't touch a surface, and then you're fine. Now, in terms of decontamination, when you're coming into your house, this is all like, this is a pretty extreme version, because I guess what I'll describe is the most extreme version. So either if you're just really worried, or if you or someone you live with is at risk. So don't feel like you have to do this. I don't encourage like anxiety amongst people, but when you're coming into the house, let's say you rode the subway or equivalent, or you were somewhere that was not necessarily clean or sterile. So I would assume that as you walk into your house, anything that has touched some surface outside could be contaminated. So then I have like a whole process. I guess I close the door, maybe turn on the lights, take off my jacket and coat. Now I'm going to assume my phone and everything is contaminated. The door handle's now contaminated. The light switch is contaminated. And let's say I've been grocery shopping. So I have bags and food from the grocery store. So probably first thing I'll do is wash my hands. Then I'll get the ethanol or equivalent, wash my phone, my ID card, my keys. Then I'll unpack all of the food. Now I'm going to assume I've touched all the food, so my hands are contaminated. And maybe the food, depending on how far you want to take it, you could consider that every piece of packaging is contaminated. Or you could say, who cares? Like, you're crazy. I'm going to stop right there.
Who cares, I think, at any point of this
Exactly. Like,
process.
you can take it as far as you want to take it, and it's really up to you where you draw the line. So you could say, it's fine, I'm just going to put all the things on the shelves. And I forgot to say, the most important principle here is the idea that currently studies suggest that the virus can live on surfaces for a few days.
Wow.
And so that's why we're taking these precautions. Yeah, if the virus died within an hour, then, or within seconds, it'd be fine.
Mm-hmm.
At least we decided the most recent time we went grocery shopping, we're just going to put the stuff on our shelves and forget about it.
Right.
But say last night, we got takeaway food, and we said, like, I could see the person in the kitchen with gloves on, and then they're touching the iPad as like orders were coming in, and presumably that gloved hand that's touching the iPad is also touching the food. So like, I want to be a little careful here. So when we got the food, we basically opened all the packages, we poured the food into our own Tupperware, and then recycled the packaging, washed our hands, and then just like reheated the food, because so long as food is hot, you're not going to catch the virus that way. Wow. And so now we haven't touched any of the packaging, we have all the food, and so we've kind of protected ourselves. But yes, if you want to take it all the way to extreme, every single package from your grocery list that you bring in, you spray down or wash, or take out everything. Like say you have a thing of cereal, you pour it out into something else and then recycle the box. Mm-hmm. But leave your bags and everything else by the door because they are contaminated.
Yeah, and to me, again, it sounds extreme, but the way I see the world, it kind of develops in spirals, so like we are now, as Tessa said, this is already alarming and worrying and scary, but this, like another virus, can be so much worse, so that like this practice can become a norm. Yeah,
it's true. I mean, I think once this whole thing is over, like nobody's going to do this because it's not necessary. But the more that, I guess you practice now, maybe in the future you need to use these principles again. Mm-hmm. But I think you choose the level of sterility that you want. I don't want anyone to go crazy. And by far the most important thing is if you ever have any symptoms, you stay home, you don't leave no matter what, unless of course you're really sick, but then you need to call ahead to make sure that on your journey out of the apartment, you don't infect a huge number of people. There's somebody in South Korea who infected over 1,000 people. Like one woman infected over 1,000 people. And that's the thing, like often you can track who a single individual infected and you really don't want to be that person. So stay home.
Yeah.
Tessa, I was just wondering, on the note about food and groceries, do you have any recommendations for like fresh produce? Any recommendations there on how to clean that?
Yeah, honestly, when I get fresh produce, I just wash it with soap and water in the sink first. So I got my peppers, washed them, got them real soapy, washed it off, and yeah, I think that's probably the best thing you can do.
That makes sense. On that note, also, I've had a lot of friends asking me questions about different types of soap, which is something that I've done a little bit of research on myself, but I wonder if as a scientist, you have any thoughts on like soaps that are labeled antibacterial versus soaps that are labeled all natural or anything like that.
I see. Yeah, no, in terms of soap, the principle of how soap works, it's like a detergent that breaks apart membranes. We're sort of lucky that this particular virus is a virus that is surrounded by a cell membrane. Not all viruses are. And so this means that if you use like any kind of soap, it will just explode the virus basically. So you don't need anything that's labeled antibacterial or anything. So long as it is soap, it will work.
That's fascinating. And also I love the idea of exploding the virus. It's great.
So I'm here. I was just about the first part that Tessa started to talk us about artificial intellect. And I wanted to know from her point of view as a scientist, what it can be like really practically apply. Not just like, you know, to gain the goals that you created it, but what you can use it for that can be good for all society from any point of view. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that, well, the particular research I do is categorized as basic research, which means that you're trying to uncover the basic, like the fundamentals of how biology works or how, in this case, the brain works. So it's not, the goal isn't to have an immediate application, which for instance, like medical research would. But again, the principle of basic biology is that everything that you learn about the fundamentals of biology can then be used for medical research or artificial intelligence or whatever other type of research. Those build on the foundations of basic biology. So I can't claim that my research into how cuttlefish brains work will have an immediate application to artificial intelligence. But I think one of the coolest things about these animals is, so cuttlefish, like octopuses, they're in a category of organism called the cephalopod, and they're invertebrates, meaning they don't have a backbone. And that means that they diverge from us, our last common ancestor. So like here are humans and here are cephalopods. The last time we had a common evolutionary ancestor was over 500 million years ago. It was like a tiny little, probably worm in the ocean. And from that little ocean worm, you had all this evolution of all these different organisms, and basically some of them grew backbones and generally grew pretty large brains, and the other ones didn't grow backbones, the invertebrates, and they became like flies and worms and snails. But what's really cool about cephalopods, like octopuses and cuttlefish, is they're the one group of invertebrates that evolved these really big brains. And so they're considered very intelligent. And so you have these two different groups, the vertebrates like us and monkeys and elephants and everything that have these large brains and we're very intelligent. They have this one group that is so distantly related from us, but they also evolved this huge brain. And so we basically don't know if their brain sort of operates with the same principles as our brains do. We know their brain is also made up of neurons and that there's kind of electrical signals pass between them. But maybe their brain is built in a totally different way, meaning that there are two different ways to build a really intelligent brain. So I think the more that I understand how a cuttlefish brain works, the more I will understand if there is basically one way to build a really sort of intelligent, powerful brain, or if there's actually more than one way to do it. And if there is more than one way to do it, then maybe currently people are using like building artificial neural networks. So these forms of AI to solve all kinds of problems, whether it's like analyzing data or it's predicting patterns. I'm sure a lot of AI is being used right now to try and predict what the impact of this pandemic is. But it's possible that if we learn about a biological system that's had billions of years to perfect itself, maybe that could actually inform how we build computers and how powerful those computers can become.
It's so interesting to see how we all, have our different professions and lives, but also how we are connected in unexpected ways. So can you talk a little bit about your out of work routines and what you do? I know you're a dancer. I know you love theater.
Well, yeah, one of my other interests is salsa dancing, which is probably the absolute worst thing you could possibly do right now, because it involves going to a room with lots of sweaty people, dancing with every single person, and like sweaty hands touching sweaty hands, and like that's like something that we should not be doing right now. So I'm not salsa dancing right now. Yeah, I guess I'm honestly, it feels still so new. I am still trying to navigate what my work from home routine is, whether it ends up being that or whether I'm sort of a full-time carer for the cuttlefish. But I know one of the articles I read about working from home and adjusting to this is to kind of take it slow. Like, don't expect that you're suddenly going to have this amazing routine and you're suddenly going to be super productive, because it's just not going to happen. Like, you need to kind of ease into it and get used to the new norm. So my first real work from home day was Friday, and I mean, it was like a mess. I woke up late, I cleaned, I ate food, I watched TV, I tried to do some work, went for a walk, played with my cat, and then it was like bedtime, and I was like, yeah, I guess people who work from home every day are very impressive individuals. Yeah. So I have a list, I'm starting a list of things, if I like don't know what to do with myself, a list of things to do. So yeah, I play the violin as well. I'll probably start practicing more often. And I mean, yeah, thank God we have internet in this particular pandemic. Can you imagine, like, in the bubonic plague or something, just sat home with like the books on your shelf and nothing else? But there are so many things that we can learn online. Yeah, all these kind of exercise classes online, so you can actually stay fit and healthy. And yeah, there's theater and art that you can enjoy. And I'm also doing my best to see possible ways that I can help. So I've signed up for a lot of lists. Like, currently they're looking for scientists who can do more COVID testing, because I've done a lot of the techniques that are currently being used for the COVID testing. I've signed up for these as a volunteer in case they need me. I've also signed up for one of these things where if there are people that need their groceries delivered, I could go out and get groceries, deliver them to someone's doorstep, things like that. So yeah, I think, yeah, I haven't done any of it yet, so I don't deserve any credit, but
no, but just even as an idea, these meetings, we'll be having them daily, actually. Yeah, meeting with the most incredible and inspiring people, and it will be free, but I think we'll start fundraising and to find the best application to the funds that we can hopefully raise. I think that's another thing. And I think all together in the community, we can think at what is the most impactful thing that we all can donate to in various forms. You know, like you said, if Tessa says we need to go out and fish shrimp, we'll help her do that. Yeah, if we find like a doctor's organization, because the doctors, of course, are so inspiring. Yeah, they are the people that can self-isolate, and they are the people that have to come in contact with the virus every day, risking their health and like their lives or potentially lives of their relatives. Yeah, it's serious, like so serious, and I think we can provide as much support as we can to these people right now.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the nice things that's going to come of this is how much community matters and how much we can all support each other, as you say. So I think there are some positives that will come through this otherwise pretty bizarre experience.
Yeah, Liz has asked a question. Liz, any thoughts about how long you might anticipate this will go on for?
I think it's going to go on for a long time. I suppose it depends where you are in the world. So I'm going to mostly speak about being in the US. There's a study that's come out that shows there's like a dramatic difference in how you approach this social isolation, and then how many deaths there are. And then I think how many deaths there are will then correlate with, you know, how impacted your life will be and what kind of changes will come. So basically there's there are, I guess, there are three scenarios. One is that nobody does anything, which is now not going to happen anywhere. The second is you do social isolation, which I think is what most places in the world are doing now. And the third is a full-on lockdown with almost no movement whatsoever. Now, clearly you can't do a full lockdown unless it's absolutely necessary because there are so many follow-on effects. But there is a dramatic difference in how many deaths and how overwhelmed the medical system will become based on whether you just do social distancing or lockdown. And given that we're not going to do full lockdown in reality unless things get really bad, I think this is definitely going to last for many months. And I think the reality is we're going to live in some state that's like this probably for 1 to 1.5 years until there is a vaccine. So the kind of unfortunate reality is this virus is very fast mutating. And that means that if you get COVID now, presumably you're then immune to it for some period of time. Your body has built antibodies. However, as soon as the virus mutates enough, it will no longer be, this new mutated version will be no longer recognized by your body's antibodies, and therefore you'll no longer be immune. So the idea is that if you look at a map of the world, there'd be these different versions of the virus spreading in different places. And basically, we're not going to all be immune until there is a vaccine. So that means that, and a vaccine will take like a minimum, it looks like, of at least 1 year, if not 1.5 years, because the number one most important thing when you develop a vaccine is to make sure it's safe. So I know that people have already, some volunteers have already been injected with a possible vaccine. And that's because you need to wait at least 1 year to make sure that they're okay. So of course, if this vaccine happened to be toxic or have some really negative effects, this is something you're about to inject into like every human on the planet. So the worst thing you could possibly do is develop a vaccine that is bad for your health. So it's really important that we get a vaccine. The good news is this virus is fairly well suited to the development of a vaccine. I could go into that, but basically there's hope that we will get a vaccine. Now, until we have this vaccine and therefore we can kind of protect everybody, we're going to have these waves of the virus spreading, whether it's one version or different mutated versions. So I think the reality is we're going to hit a peak of the virus probably around May. I think this is the current estimates. There's going to be the highest death rate, and it's going to be really bad because our healthcare systems can't cope. And that's partly because we didn't take necessary steps early on enough, and that's partly because of the leadership of this country. But then after that, you know, the higher the death rate, the more extreme the measure is going to be, and that is going to contain it. But then at a certain point, you know, people can't live in total isolation. Businesses are going under. Of course, there are so many knock-on effects. So they'll start to lift the restrictions once the death rate starts to go down. Now, once they lift the restrictions, people go out and about and things will be slightly more normal. But then because people are mixing more, the rates will go up again. So I think probably, and I'm sorry this is kind of dark, but I think probably for about 1 to 1.5 years, we're going to have these waves where there'll be really severe restrictions. Then they'll start to raise them a bit. We'll go out, we'll be able to enjoy our lives a bit more, but then it'll get worse. So then we'll go back into lockdown. And I think that will just become the norm for the next year to 1.5 years. And then at some point, we'll get a vaccine and things will get better.
Oh my, Tessa, thank you so much. I think it is better to face the reality now than to just find out later, because this is what has already happened. Yeah, if we listen to Bill Gates, and I'm sure some other scientists, Bill Gates is just a public figure that was doing the best that he could. Then I saw that he was on Vox and like all the main media and on TED Talk. Like, what can you do as a public figure? Yeah, you can go around and talk about it, but no measures, what taken, yeah, and now we are where we are. And now Dr. Tessa is telling us, again, very realistic prediction. To me, we cannot do it from the local, my country position, because this is the thing that is, that's about all of us. So only thinking as we are humans of this planet. But of course, there's resistance.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of want to paint the most realistic picture, is because it is fully impacted by what we do now, as you say. So the more severe the measures are now, and the more that people take this seriously, the faster this will be over, and the more that we'll be able to control it. So everybody, I don't know, probably everyone's heard this by now, this phrase, flatten the curve. So this means that the more that we kind of suppress our own movements and we have this social isolation, and the more that we prevent the spread of the virus, the more that the hospitals can cope with the number of severe cases there are. And so we'll have much fewer deaths. Whereas if we just let, everything run haywire, there'll be this massive spike of really severe cases, and it'll totally overwhelm the healthcare system. And so a lot more people will die. Mm-hmm. So I think, basically the more measures we take now, the more manageable this will be. And something that I haven't mentioned is that, of course, there are scientists around the world working as hard as they can on both vaccines and treatments for COVID, as well as all of the research into just how this virus works and what's happening. And I'm very encouraged by what is happening on the research front. People are just doing things at unimaginable speed. The fact that some Chinese scientists already solved the structure of the virus, whatever, it's really impressive. And so the good news, so the vaccine is going to be slow because, as I said, as soon as you develop a vaccine and you inject into healthy volunteers, you have to wait at least a year to make sure that they are not sort of badly affected by the vaccine itself. But in terms of treatments for the symptoms or for the effects of the virus, there are a lot of drugs that already have FDA approval or the equivalent in other countries. So there are drugs that, for instance, there's a malaria drug that has already been approved for treating malaria. And so this means that it's been through all of these different clinical trials. So we know it's safe for humans. And as long as they just need to do the trials to make sure that it has some positive effects on the symptoms of the virus. But if it works, then you could very quickly start using it to treat humans. So it's not a brand new drug. It doesn't have to go through all of those years-long clinical trials. So it's possible that on a much shorter time frame, we will start to have treatments. And then with treatments, we'll have a lower death rate and it will be more manageable. So I'm encouraged by the research that's being done, but I know it's still a slightly bad outlook.
Yeah, to me, I was thinking and telling everyone, and in ELK Academy, we were talking for already as long as we were about getting together and, fixing together the big issues that we have to face as humanity. And I think this is just an exercise for us of practical, and I was always saying that I wish we didn't have to face some disaster so that we go into our higher minds and create this new way of doing things together. And for example, with environment, again, scientists have been telling us that it can become irreversible, and it's becoming irreversible. But again, because we're well, it's not here now. Yeah, so it's totally this primitive mind thinking where we don't face the problem before it's actually in our face. So it feels like the world has, now said, okay, humans, you are not, there's no hope that you will do it on your own, with your own will. So here's the first problem, that there's no way you can't ignore, So listen to Tessa, listen to the scientists, and let's act, I guess, as global neighbors. That's the best, phrase we are able to create. And thank you so much, Tessa. neighbors, if you have any questions or thoughts and idea, Chrissy, how do you feel about after this talk?
I think it was great. Tessa, thank you so much for sharing that realistic vision of what's going on here and what we can expect, because I think that we're getting so many different ideas from different sources. It's hard to think about, what should we believe? And of course, people sort of, the sports fan mentality that you mentioned, Fedor, we want to believe that we're going to get to leave our houses again soon, but ultimately it's going to be better for everyone, more effective, safer, if we have this sort of more realistic version of things. Even if the vision is darker, the outcome will be brighter. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, we have Vlad that wants to ask a question. Yeah, Vlad, sure. Go ahead. We have another maybe 5 minutes. Yeah.
Hey, this is the proper mask?
Ooh.
Sorry?
Is this a proper mask?
That's a pretty serious mask.
Actually, it was a gift from my work, and the guys I work for, they're very smart, so they're very serious about it, and they just gave me this mask, and I go to Giant for groceries with it. It's pretty fun.
Wow. I guess depending on where you live, if you do have extra protective masks, it might actually be better if you can donate them to doctors or healthcare workers. I mean,
I understand, but it just, I guess it's painter's mask or something like that.
oh, okay, it's not, yeah, I guess if it's not actually for viruses, then it's probably not going to do much. But at least as scientists, we've emptied all of our PPE, personal protective equipment, like all of the masks and things that we had, we've all donated to the hospitals because they're in dire need of them. And that's one of the scariest impacts of this right now. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing to say. Again, we need, Tessa, we need people like you telling us what to do, because like some things are, they kind of, when you say it, there's like, oh, of course, but before you say it, it just doesn't go, because there are so many things that are now, and our capabilities of our focus, are limited as of now as humans. So that's a beautiful thought. So maybe again, something, if we can do something to support, to help the doctors to stay safe.
But it does depend, on the intention of the mask. If that's a painter's mask, then it's probably not hospital grade, but if it helps you to stay sane when you go to the supermarket, then do it.
Okay, guys, so Tessa, thank you so much. Let me again send the link. You guys, if you follow this link, we'll have your email, and you can also share a little bit your experience of this talk and your thoughts and ideas, and maybe some things that you can contribute to to what's happening right now in the world. So follow the link and fill in the questionnaire, and you can also ask questions if you're like think of something. We'll make sure to pass it over to Tessa and then to communicate. So thank you, neighbors. Thank you, Tessa. That was absolutely beautiful. Chrissy, thank you for co-hosting.
Yes, thank you, Fedor. Thank you, Tessa. This was wonderful.
Serious, thank you for being with us too. Let's all think about the people that can share this important insights for us. So like send them our way. If you know someone that we should talk to together, please let us know. Oh yeah.
Thanks for organizing, Fedor.
Yeah.
All right. It was a pleasure.
Just let us know. Yeah, guys. So complete the survey so that we can stay connected. Yeah, so we don't lose each other. Okay.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Dave. Tessa, thank you so much.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.